No, no doubt.
Oh,
Good evening. Welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for October 2nd, 2017. Can we have the roll, please?
Tyler Robinson.
Here.
John Spring.
Here.
Brendan Walker.
Present.
Andre Spinelli.
Here.
Danielle Bailey. Here. Greg Strike.
Here.
Brian Looney.
Here.
Mr. Sporthays and Ms. Barker have been excused. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, minutes for August 14th, 2017. Does anybody have, we have a motion to approve? Thank you, Ms. Bailey. A second? Thank you, Mr. Looney. Any discussion? I have one, but does anyone have any discussion before I go? No? I'd like to refer you to page 4 of 7. Under my name, it says, in his mind, the basis for, instead of this petitioner, it should say the commissioner in making their decision does not prove to be new information. If you recall, the basis had to do with someone's rationale on the commission, and that was what my reference was to. Everyone good with that addition? As amended, any objection to adopting the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are adopted. Next up, disclosures. Mr. Walker.
Only that I was not present for the last meeting, and so I will not be able to vote on the resolutions tonight.
Brandon, just grab the mic a little closer.
I was not present for the last meeting, so I will not be voting on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Ms. Bailey?
None.
Mr. Looney?
Actually, I realize that it's just an informational item, but I do have a conflict on the 32nd, 33rd case.
Understood. So as an informational item, do we need to make him go sit outside the chambers, or can we let him sit and be silent on this one? Thank you for that disclosure. Greg?
Nothing.
I have none.
Okay. Andre?
None.
And I have none. So next up, informational item, case 2017-121, technical amendment to AMC 2107-120A1 to clarify when large commercial establishment development standards are applicable. Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is an informational item, not for action by the Commission, but one of the important objectives of the Planning Department is to look for formatting errors and inconsistencies in the new code in order to clean up those issues and to get those corrections made as quickly as possible. One such correction is that the table of allowed uses has a superscript, I think it's a 2, that points out every commercial retail establishment that is subject to our big box standards, the large establishments, major site plan review and design standards. And that is a complete list. But when you go to the end of Chapter 7, where those standards exist, it's an incomplete list under the applicability. So in one part of the code, it says you're subject to this, and then in the other part of the code, it just has a partial laundry list of the use types that would be subject to it. And so what this ordinance does is adds the 3 or 4 missing use types. For instance, marijuana retail store or retail establishment. In the table, it's got that superscript that says they're subject to big box, but it's not listed in the applicability section of large establishments. That inconsistency leads to confusion. The purpose of this ordinance is just to clean up this. It has no substantive change. Thank you.
Thank you. Before, I think John's been good at making a motion on this one to weigh in on whether this meets that standard. I had a substantive question on the grammar. Can I go first on that? So on the page 4, the applicability, the section that's being amended, I think I'm getting confused with my commas, my semicolons, and are we saying retail sales, semicolon, animal sales, service and care, semicolon, food and beverage services, semicolon, no or, just entertainment and recreation use categories, semicolon, vehicle parts and supplies, semicolon. I mean, is that, I'm kind of confused. Are they individual uses, and then at the end we want to say, or any combination thereof of all of those? Is that what we're trying to do?
Yeah, the issue here, and I struggled over this, is that half of so there are some use categories, and all the use types within those use categories are subject to large establishments standards. But then there are some use types that specifically require it that are under industrial uses or some other. So you have use types and use categories, and so where I could use the umbrella use category, that's where it is in code. You leave it, but it's not all marijuana establishments that are subject to just the marijuana retail establishment use type. So if you have any one of these, whether it be a use category or a use type or any combination thereof, occupying more than 20,000 square feet, then you're subject to these architectural and site planning standards.
That's helpful. I think the way that it reads is that or any combination thereof feels like it's part of just the new addition and not part of the whole thing. If you're following me. So I was confused as to whether that also reflected on the use categories, and I think you mean it to. The grammar's confusing to me.
Totally, and so I had it written a little bit differently, but Tom Davis, helped me correct this. Apparently, the consistency for the code is it's like a legal thing that you use or instead of and. So he wanted it this way.
Okay, it's got to get through your attorney reviews when it goes to the assembly anyway. I'll let it go there, but it's just make a note that it's a bit, it doesn't read fluidly.
Yeah.
Mr. Spring.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that the commission agrees with the director that this is a technical amendment to Title 21 needed to address, in this case, inconsistencies with the Title 21 rewrite project.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Any additional discussion? Any objection to that motion? Hearing none, that motion accompanies that ordinance forward to the assembly. Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Next up, the informational item, case 2017-0123. This is Context-Sensitive Solutions Transportation Project Concept Report for West 32nd Avenue and East 33rd Avenue from Arctic to Old Seward. Ms. Ferguson, this yours?
Yes, it is. But again, this is just an informational item, no action for the commission this evening. The project managers are also in the audience tonight if you have any questions, but this is just a concept report to the commission to make them aware of the project. A little bit early, if you have any comments at this time that the designers would like to hear. It will be returning to the commission for a draft design study report.
Anyone have any then questions or comments for either staff or the designer? Go ahead, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a little bit different from previous concept reports, and I think it's a good change. Previously, and I talked to, I think, the Public Works section, is that what it's called now, at the city regarding changes in the process. And if I remember right, the idea was to focus on the public participation process and comments from the public regarding the needs within the corridor in cases of street designs like this, and maybe not go into the detail into the alternatives. And I think that's the change that was made here. and I agree with it. I think it's a good change, because I think the detail, going into detail about the comments about from the stakeholders and the neighborhoods in the area, and explaining how what was done in terms of public involvement is exactly what we need in a concept report like this. Not going into the alternatives, because we can't. We're just reviewing the information, and we're going to get a second shot at those alternatives anyway in the next phase. So, good job, I think, is what I'm trying to say. I agree with the way this was done.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I had just a couple. First of all, I like the way that the report very clearly distinguishes three different context areas along this corridor. I mean, I think that's really helpful. They function very differently. I've always been very intrigued by the area between Denali and the highway. I think that's an area that has a lot of potential that could function a lot better and have a lot higher development over time. My question, two items. One is, the areas from Arctic to, basically the highway, but then there's this comment about extending a pedestrian or bicycle pathway to Spenard. And I'm wondering how that, since it's sort of technically outside of the project boundary, what this report, what we're really saying. Is it that this report is recommending that segment be added to the, a different project, or what really are we, does the design intend to actually design that pathway moving forward since it's outside? What's the plan for that?
Mr. Chair, I don't have the answer to that, but I'm sure CRW does. They are heading to the podium now.
Great, and then I would, while you're coming up, I'd just say I'm deathly afraid of adding more couplets, more one-way couplets in this town. So you just kind of threw that one in there as a bullet. So just know that that's a steep hurdle for me.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Matt Edge. I'm with CRW Engineering Group. I'm the project manager. There is or has been discussion of adding a pathway from Arctic Boulevard towards Spenard that is identified in the bike plan. That's a desirable project. At this time, it's not within the project scope to do that, to design it. Our design study report will kind of discuss that, and we have contacted AWW because it would cross their property there off Arctic Boulevard, and they have so far seemed amenable to adding the pathway connection there, but at this time it's not really going to be incorporated as a design element, more just as something that could happen in the future. I mean, potentially it could be added to this project, but that would be up to PM&E.
Gotcha. Is it something where you would have the knowing whether it was possible or not would potentially affect your design as you move the design forward?
It could impact intersection alternatives at the Arctic Boulevard and 32nd Avenue, but I think most of the alternatives we will look at could incorporate that pathway if need be. I think it would be mostly related to whether or not funding was available, because it would significantly expand the project scope. 32nd Avenue from Spenard Boulevard or Spenard Road over to the AWW property is in pretty bad shape as well, so it would likely require some upgrades to that section of roadway. So it could get expensive to add that to the project scope.
Right, but I do appreciate you looking. I mean, it's not like these projects literally just end. I mean, I know that projects end and the scope and the funding ends, but I do appreciate you thinking about what would happen if it were to be extended, how that context hopefully. So I think it's a great suggestion. It's helpful to know that even the recommendation makes us think moving forward, hey, this might be a needed thing or a necessary thing to get some east-west connectivity in Midtown.
Yeah, I agree.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for staff or CRW? Hearing none, thanks for the report.
Thank you.
Next up is the consent agenda. There are 2 resolutions for approval. Can we have a motion to approve? Thank you, Mr. Strike. Can we get a second? Aside from Mr. Walker's abstention, any questions or issues or resolutions to pull from the agenda? Any objections to approving those resolutions? Hearing none, the resolutions are approved. Go ahead. Oh, the question, we give them to the guy sitting next to you. He can take them home with him on his bicycle, hopefully. So the question was, do we do anything with is there another use for them? Brian, do you know, or city folks know, rather than just dumping these things? It's for us. Yeah. Let the record state I would be just fine with an electronic copy of this version in the future, so.
If you want to keep it, hang on to it, but otherwise, give it to me and make sure it's posted to the right person.
All right. Next up is our public hearing case. The case is 2017-105. The petitioner is the Municipality of Anchorage Heritage Land Bank, and the request is to rezone from PLI to R6. The area is about 17.5 acres, and we're generally located south of Potter Heights Drive, east of Potter Valley Road, and north of South Point Ridge Drive. Yeah. The procedure by which the public may speak to the commission at this meeting is after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, I'll ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the commission rules of procedure. Petitioners, including his or her representatives, get 10 minutes, and part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representative of groups such as community councils, 5 minutes, and individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. That is the case of a rezoning here this evening. So with that, like the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Heritage Land Bank is requesting a rezone one tract of land totaling 17.461 acres from Public Lands and Institutions District to Residential Low-Density 1-Acre District. None of the reviewing agencies had any objection to the rezoning. There were 2 public comments received, and the Rabbit Creek Community Council passed a resolution supporting this rezone. The department finds that the approval criteria 1 through 9 are met. The department finds that the department is recommending approval of this rezoning. A draft assembly ordinance is enclosed on page 7 of your packet. So there were 2 public comments received. One's in your packet. One was laid on the table this evening. The department finds that the rezone request complies with a 2010 Hillside District Plan and Land Use Plan map, the 2040 Land Use Plan, and Anchorage 2020, specifically policies 6, 7 of Anchorage 2020. The only developed parcel abutting this tract of land is an R6 lot to the north, which has a single-family house and contains 2.5 acres. The rezone to R6 is compatible with all the adjoining lots on all sides. There are 2 neighborhood parks, and open space tracts located north and south of the petition site. The remaining property surrounding the petition site is zoned R6 and is not developed. The rezone complies with the Potter Valley Land Use Analysis, which is an adopted plan, which calls for this rezoning to residential prior to the municipality or the Heritage Land Bank marketing the property for sale. Be happy to answer any questions, and the petitioner's representative is here as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Spring, go ahead.
I'm having a little trouble figuring out the advantages of R10 versus an R6 district in terms of dealing with steep slopes. And there wasn't any information regarding slopes on this parcel. I'm assuming that there is some because they tracked it out, the southern portion, partly because of steep slopes, I think. Do you know how steep the average slope is in this parcel, and then I have a follow-up question.
Mr. Spring, I've walked the site, and it appeared to have topography similar to property on either side that is zoned R6. But I did not research the average slope of the lot. I did read that one or two of the park tracks was steeper than other parts of this sub-area of the hillside.
I guess my question is, if I may, Mr. Chair, is the R10 even needed anymore? I mean, if you're not going to use it, as explained in the staff report, the new Title 21 contains requirements that deal with slope, especially in an R6 type. And if it meets a certain average slope of 30%, 50%, then you have to meet certain requirements about the development envelope and whatever. It looks like the R10 is a little bit more strict regarding development and the envelope, but I'm not that familiar with the changes that were made in it. So tell me, so how do you decide whether to recommend the R10 versus R6, and what would be the distinction? How would I know a parcel should be R10 versus R6?
Well, through the chair, Mr. Spring, so there's plenty of R10 in Eagle River and on the Anchorage Hillside, and so the R10 is not going away. But you raise a very good intellectual point that, we have these steep slope standards in Chapter 7 that are rather restrictive. They put additional restrictions on, I think, development over 25%. Well, over 30%, it's basically prohibited. Yeah. So, there are additional restrictions. Do those new steep slope standards obviate the need to have the R10 district at all? I'm not sure. The R10 has smaller setback requirements than the R6. That's one difference between the two districts. The minimum lot size in the R10 varies depending on the average slope of a lot, but one would only know that upon proposing a subdivision. How many lots you would get and how they would be designed and the average slope of each one of those individual lots. There's definitely advantages, I would think, to the developer with going to R6. I think that, the property may never be developed if it was rezoned to R10, because once you take the steep slope standards and the R10 average slope standards, it's questionable how many lots you would get out of all of those 17 acres. And then at that point, can you subdivide it and construct a road and make it economically feasible project to do that? I'd say that the R10 was considered for this property, but given that there was R6 on all sides, it seemed appropriate to rezone to the matching zoning district.
One just follow up. Well, I think we've got to be careful with this because a previous plan, the Potter Valley plan, which is 1999 or something, recommended R10. So I think we need to make a justification that things changed enough and that it's no longer reasonable to apply R10 to it. Because we're overturning that plan to some extent. I mean, since it states it's supposed to be R10.
Well, there's part of the plan where it says that it needs to be rezoned to residential district. There is a statement about R10 in there. For the large lot, 1 acre districts, there's a variety of different districts to choose from. The R6 is the predominant zoning district in this part of the hillside. I'll look in the plan and see if I can see that section that you're citing, and how specific it is that it shall be R10. Time has passed since 1999 when this plan was adopted, and the department does believe that there are adequate protections with the R6 and the steep slope standards that are subject to all sloping, all lots or tracks with slopes exceeding certain thresholds.
Mr. Spinelli.
Yes, through the chair. I'm assuming that, yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, the idea here is to subdivide these lots?
I think HLB wants to sell the tract as a whole and allow. Sorry, I think that HLB's plan is to sell the tract as a whole and allow the private owner to subdivide it.
And I was doing a little research on Google Maps, and it looks like this site, you can access Rabbit Creek from Golden View from this site. Is that correct?
Yes.
And from what Google was telling me, it's roughly the same amount of time to the DeArmond and New Seward intersection, whether you take, you drive down the switchbacks through Potter or you wind through Golden View. And I guess I'm just curious, is the municipality willing to support subdivision of this land, adding, potentially adding traffic to the Golden View Rabbit Creek intersection?
Through the chair, Mr. Spinelli, yes, most definitely. The planning department is in support of this this rezoning to R6, which would create approximately 14 residential single-family lots. The amount of car traffic increase from this subdivision is really small.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before we go to the petitioner? Mr. Strike.
I believe I had seen one area in here, and I've been looking for it, and that is the topography, how steep it is. And I'm going off a recollection that that there is a notation in here regarding that. I just can't find it. But the question then, the pertinent question now at hand is, any wetlands?
Yes. Yeah, there are wetlands, sensitive environmental features.
And the reason I'm asking that is the similarities we're seeing between this redevelopment of a lot plat up on the hillside and the one that was just not approved here a few weeks ago, basically stipulating the exact same reasons why they should be replatting or rezoning theirs. They were going from R8 to R6. And they had issues with their septic areas, which this is saying there are issues with septic. Topography, which is they were having the same issues with topography, as well as the density and so forth. So let me ask you this. Is R8 appropriate zoning for this lot? We were talking R10 here, but I'm going back to none of the lots, of the 17 acres, only 11, it states, will even be developable. So you'll have less than one residence per acre. So it'll be a ratio of, 1.6 or whatever, 1.5. Yet we're platting this as if we're rezoning this as if it'll be 1 acre lots. I'm just going back again. I'm feeding back to the last case that we had in the area, not supported by the Rabbit Creek Community Council, but the same facts. And we didn't go, and the other adjoining area was R6 around that area, yet we left it at R8.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, I mean, that's a fair comparison. There are similarities, but they're not identical by any means. Well, for one, you had 3 community councils and 30-some people that came out against the other rezone. In this case, you simply have 2 concerned property owners wanting access across the lot to their landlocked lots. But otherwise, you just have the community council's resolution in support of it. So that should hold some weight about the community's concerns about the proposed zoning. And they had the same sort of public process where there was a community council meeting presentation and, there was public hearing notices mailed out for this meeting that we're here tonight and also prior to the community meeting in front of the community council meeting. But the Lewis and Clark site had 2 spots of R6, but the rest were R8 and R9. I forget if there was an R10, but it had streams crossing it. It was at the headwaters of Rabbit Creek. There was a greater variety of, there was more concern about the environmental features, and there was a greater variety of different zoning districts adjoining it. Also, all the property surrounding that development, or the Lewis and Clark property, except for to the south, was subdivided and developed. In this case, there's only 1 lot developed adjoining it.
And I appreciate that, and and thank you. And I think that's going to be important because I don't want to see a situation that if you're the city, you get R6, but if you're a private developer, you're stuck. So I don't want to differentiate between them and us and making sure that we have some continuity and rationalization, again, that came before this body as we move forward. Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, if I could just get one little quip in, the planning department did recommend approval for the Lewis and Clark rezone as well.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. McLaughlin. Anyone else, questions for staff? Okay, I'd like to invite the petitioner. Oh, you in?
Just one quick question.
Hold on just a
maybe I'll wait for
Okay.
the petitioner. Sorry.
Good evening. I think the main point I need to make tonight is why we're different than Lewis and Clark.
Well.
My name is Wendy Wilbur. I'm with Kittleson and Associates, and I'm representing the Heritage Land Bank. This parcel was recently replatted in compliance with the 1999 Potter Valley Land Use Plan and the Hillside District Plan. As part of that plat, there was a tract set aside for parkland, consistent with the plans, and there was a tract set aside for open space. The middle section, which is the subject of this rezone, has been identified for low-intensity, large lot residential since 1999, and we are in full compliance with those plans. As a matter of fact, the 1999 Potter Valley Land Use Plan has a clause that says, specifically related to this HLB parcel, if new information becomes available, then it would be worthy to relook at the carrying capacity of this particular lot. So the 1999 land use plan specifically says we might need to reevaluate the proposed R10 zoning for this particular parcel. So we are in full compliance with that. The Hillside District Plan identifies R6 as an implementing zone for this parcel. So what's different about this in the Lewis and Clark? Rabbit Creek Community Council came out in full support of this rezone. They even had a second meeting to bring it back up, and there were no objections. Their only concern was they felt that the 2 adjacent parcels, the parkland and the open space land, should also be a subject and tied to this rezone, and it should go to PLI-P, as in parks. However, that was not passed because this is not within the Parks and Recs boundary, so it makes no sense. There was never an objection about the slopes, the lot size, the soils, or the environmental resources on this parcel. This is the first time this parcel has ever come forward for a rezone. It's different because it's going from PLI to residential. What else the parcel did when it was platted is it did dedicate a 60-foot public use easement to provide a future roadway connection, which is also consistent with the Hillside District Plan. There was a comment earlier about traffic, and the Hillside District Plan actually ran a model, and it included this particular road dedication and extension of Potter Heights. And at that time, the model, building this out at a large lot, low-intensity residential, did not identify any traffic concerns in the area. It also dedicated a trail easement to through the parcel to access Chugach lands. So what else is different is it's completely surrounded by R6, with the exception of the 2 lots that remain PLI for park and open space. And if you look at the R6 development in this area, you have lots that are much smaller than an acre because they were developed under a specific master plan and ordinance. You have lots in R6 that are right at an acre, and you have lots in the R6 district that are at 2.5 acres. And that has to do with slopes, it has to do with wetlands that are in the area. And so why did we choose R6? Because it gives you maximum flexibility. There are some steeper slopes on this lot. The average slope is about 21%. So if you go with R10, that lets you put about 5 homes on that because all of your lots have to be 2.5 acres. If you go with R6, you can have some acre lots where you have flatter areas, and you can have some larger lots that are 2.5 acres where you have the steeper slopes. So it gives you maximum flexibility on this particular site. There are no mapped wetlands on this site. So what we have to be really careful about is this rezone has to be evaluated under the 9 criteria. We aren't proposing a subdivision. We're proposing a rezone so that the Heritage Land Bank can actually dispose of this land to the public benefit. So the Heritage Land Bank has a mission that when they dispose of land, there is a monetary and or non-monetary benefit to the citizens of Anchorage at large. And they did try to sell this parcel several times and it did not sell. And so an R6 gives them more potential to sell, it gives more money back in the bank to continue to manage the HLB lands. And so there is a definite public interest with this land, and I think that separates it from the Lewis and Clark. I'm trying to think what other questions you had. So the wetlands aren't mapped. So when it is subdivided, it has to go through the whole process. And I think, as you know, the subdivision process is very extensive, and that's where Title 21 kicks in, that has specific standards for steep slopes, for drainage, for wetlands, for streams. So at the end of the day, that will decide the actual density of this parcel, which will be much less than probably 1 dwelling unit per acre. And that will all be determined. In terms of protecting the environment, there are actually plat notes that says no residential units can be developed on this until their soils tests. So with that, I'll answer questions and save any time for rebuttal, please.
Thank you. You have about 4.5 minutes for rebuttal. Mr. Strike, then Mr. Spring.
Yeah, real quick. I know the property has been for sale for some time. So this is being positioned then to remarket and resell, or do you have a contingent offer on the property now?
No, this would be to remarket and to resell. And then whoever purchased the property would have to go through the full subdivision process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spring.
This seems to be one of those areas, there's a few of them in the hillside in particular, that could use a sub-area circulation study. And there was one done, I think, over by Bear Valley Elementary School in that area, and I think it really helped organize, the subdivision process, and so people knew in advance where the roads had to be. See, like this area doesn't have one, I don't believe. There's no sub-area circulation study. So I have some concerns, how we're going to figure out when, it's not my job because we don't do subdivisions, but how they're going to know where to extend the roads to the east and further beyond there. But so I guess that's kind of a rhetorical question.
Well, the Potter Heights Drive is already platted, and so we're going to provide a north-south connection across the parcel, and it's a floating easement, which allows the developer to, I guess, find the best route forward across that property and provide access. And that was all modeled in the Hillside District Plan. These are all identified in their plan on their road figure, which is There's a copy of it in your packet. Page 4.12, 4-12 talks about that.
Yeah, I think that's good, that the hillside plan had that. Just a little side issue. It looks like that easement is fairly close to Finland. Is there enough separation distance from there? It's a floating easement, but so I guess you can move it if there's possible. But
So again, when it's subdivided, traffic will evaluate all of that, and if there's a problem, they'll have to do a traffic impact analysis, and they will determine the final road alignment, site distance curves, and that will be done during the subdivision process. That's not part of a rezone process.
Okay.
All the rezone process does is identify density, and is this density appropriate for this land?
Yeah.
And it is abutted by much higher density lands.
yeah, my main issue is trying to address the comment regarding the connection to the east. There was a person that wrote in saying, I got some land out there, how are you going to deal with it? And I'll give you an out, I guess, because I think the code does accommodate that. There's a connectivity section of the Title 21 that says that you have to connect, makes requirements for connections. And I think in this case, it would probably require that when they come in for a subdivision, that they will have to have a connection to that eastern portion. Where it happens, I don't know, but because there's no circulation study. But so I think that that's not really an issue.
Any other questions for the petitioner before we go to public hearing? Okay, like I said, 4.5 minutes. At this point, I'd like to invite public down for public testimony. Anyone wishing to testify, come on down.
Go ahead. I want to hear what you say.
Hello, I'm Daryl Krolik, and my lot actually is one of the ones that adjoin this parcel. And I guess I just wanted to say that I think Wendy said that, you know, all the lands that adjoin it are not all the lands are 2.5 acres, but I think they are, you know. Mine's the only 2.5 acre lot that it's on the east and south side of that parcel. So that might be a little bit of misinformation there. So I guess I would like to see, in my opinion, all the land around there is 2.5 acres. So whatever zoning would require those larger lots, I would agree with that.
Could you spell your name for us, please?
It's Krolik, K-R-O-L-I-C-K.
Great. I think I got a question for you from Mr. Spring. Go ahead.
Yeah, are you the one that's landlocked?
No.
Parcel? Yours not landlocked then, okay.
Right.
So you're,
Right,
okay.
right. Most of those 2.5 acre lots, though, are landlocked. But
I see no further questions. Thank you for your comments, sir. Three minutes. You're speaking on behalf of yourself. Diane Holmes.
Diane Holmes. Mr. Spinelli, please ask me that same question later. If I go over time, I have a different answer than staff. The HOB mission is to dispose of lands when the market is favorable. And while some would say that this rezone is in preparation for selling, I believe there's no hurry to rezone when it would be better for the environment and for any developer to wait until Hillside District Plan's policy 2C is codified. That policy is for a hillside conservation subdivision that would be much better on this very steep slope and less costly for the developer to build. In the recent land use plan that just passed, codifying this policy was recommended. We could have used it for that Lewis and Clark rezone. Actually, you denied that rezone twice, and its average slope was much less than what you just heard, as this one is, 21%. This is huge. If ever there was a need for a conservation subdivision, this parcel needs it because R10 is uneconomical with a requirement for 300-foot lot width. And yet R6 is too small given the environment. No matter what people say that the plating board may not allow 1 acre lots because of the various conditions placed on steep slopes, we all know that there will be a way for 1 acre lots, or nearly so, to be platted. This is simply not the place for small lots. Personally, I feel the council didn't do due diligence before they approved this rezone. They did not ask for comments from the neighbors, and they usually do. The neighbors, some of whom wanted to be here tonight but could not, are very concerned about drainage. They are already feeling the results of drainage on Potter Valley Road from development from the south. It's really a shame that HLB is a self-supporting agency. If it weren't, there would not be this rush to sell the property before Policy 2C is in place. Future developers will find it less costly to develop with a policy that lets them cluster houses. I know it's a concern, too, that the trail was platted during the replatting earlier this year, and we want to make sure that's maintained. We fear it will drop through the cracks of all the different administrative procedures. These photos are to remind you of the earlier drainage issues that are not far from this parcel before you. We don't need to reinvent the drainage wheel by making more mistakes. And I do not agree that the land use plan density map allows for the highest density per category and color automatically. Rather, page 31 of that, which you passed, makes that very clear that it's not an automatic pass to the highest density. No, gee, I have a few seconds.
Well timed. You have 3 seconds left,
Yep.
and there we go. Are there any questions? Mr. Spring and then Mr. Spinelli.
When you refer to 2C of the Hillside District Plan, you're referring to the conservation subdivision?
Yes.
And so currently, you can do a cluster plat in an R6, which allows you to go to a 40,000 square foot lot if you're preserving 30% or more for whatever wetlands. If, for example, is a subdivision that I did that I felt met 2C of the Hillside District Plan. And are you thinking that that wouldn't work here?
The cluster method that you described, which I'm really not familiar with?
Yeah, basically allowing an R6 subdivision to go in a cluster formation, assuming some of it's tracted off for open space. The areas where you probably shouldn't be doing the things that you show in your pictures.
Well, I'm not sure what that is because I don't know, so I don't know what the difference might be between the Policy 2C and the one that's already in place. But if there is one in place, then maybe that would be a desirable plat.
Okay, that's all I had.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. I see no further questions.
You wanted to ask about the road, didn't you?
Go ahead, Mr. Spinelli. No.
I guess we should hear your comments on the road.
I think your question was, can you get from this parcel to Rabbit Creek Road?
Yes.
Legally, no. Technically, yes. There's a part of the road, you have to go down an easement, which is we call Finland, which is not really a road, I don't think yet. And then you have to go down into a very steep canyon that Mr. Hart can tell you is exceedingly steep. It's not maintained by the Limited Road Service, and yet it's the only way to get across Potter Creek. And then you have to go up a steep hill to get to the roads that eventually lead to Golden View and Rabbit Creek. The fire department doesn't go there.
One more follow-up. I guess my point, what I was trying to get at, is if I sold a house to somebody in this subdivision, and they were taking their kids to drop them off at Golden View Middle School, how would they get there?
If they've got a good Subaru or a four-wheel drive with studs and maybe sometime chains, then they could do it. Otherwise, they'd have to go all the way down and around.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spinelli. Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Anyone else wishing to testify? Going once. Okay. With that, Ms. Wilbur, you want to come up in 4.5 minutes for rebuttal?
All right, just a quick clarification. When I said that there were lots smaller than 1 acre in the R6 zones, I wasn't referring necessarily to abutting lots. I was talking about all of the surrounding R6 zoning. The lots directly adjacent to the parcel are primarily 2.5 acre lots, but I do want to be clear, those are zoned R6, and they could be further subdivided into 1 acre lots under that zoning. So they have not been, but perhaps if there is road access, then those could be subdivided into 1 acre lots. So again, we are very, very consistent with the surrounding, the adjacent zoning, which I think is different than your other cases. And this rezone does not preclude a future conservation subdivision or the cluster subdividing. That's still very, very possible. And I think Diane did a very good job answering how to get to Golden View. You need a four-wheel drive and a little bit of bravery to get there. So I would urge the commission to pass this rezone. Will this parcel sell in the next week? Is it going to be costly to develop? And will these subdivision standards be stringent and really affect the final density of this parcel? Absolutely. But we're here before you tonight. It's good to have it in place. It's consistent with all the plans since 1999 to get this rezoned residential. And HLB certainly can't do anything with this land should an opportunity arise unless it is rezoned, because it will be very costly to develop. And frankly, there's just no reason not to. It's pretty straightforward, and the Rabbit Creek, like I said, the Rabbit Creek Community Council, to be perfectly honest, rarely supports a project. They had 2 meetings on it, and there was no objection. And I think in many ways they're quite active, and it speaks for itself. It is consistent with the Hillside District Plan and the intent of this parcel, and it is in the best interest of the city and the Heritage Land Bank.
Thank you. I have Mr. Strike in the queue. Go ahead, Mr. Strike.
Thank you for that. Are we proposing, or is there in the proposal here any access to the property that is landlocked in the back?
The 60-foot platted roadway it's currently called Miller's Road, so that would provide access to the parcels to the south, so kind of heading down. Because we're not subdividing further, there's no easement for an east-west to those landlocked parcels. And so that would be part of the platting process, because there are multiple. So which one do you provide access to? That's typically a private developer is not required to provide public access to a landlocked landowner. So that is a difficult situation, to say the least.
But you're currently a public owner.
We are currently a public owner, but we're not platting it. So.
Mr. McLaughlin.
In an abundance of caution, I'd just like to give you my spiel on platting. One of the basics of platting is providing a road access, dedicated right-of-way access to any landlocked parcels. So they're not any sort of. One of the basics of platting is not to allow for the creation of landlocked parcels. So any subdivision of this parcel will have to take into account access east to west. That'll just be a basic understanding of the plat. And it's atypical to add special limitations that, could last 100 years, or, to add special limitations or requirements upon a subdivision with a rezone. We have a separate process for subdividing that will deal with those items, and just would the department's position is that dealing with as the petitioner said, that overall density and the appropriate zoning, the petitioner's request is the focus of this. It's not to imagine how it would be subdivided to provide access across the property to the east. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the petitioner or staff before we close the public hearing? Okay. Hearing none, the public hearing is closed. What's the wish of the body? Mr. Spring.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of the rezone from PLI to R6.
Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Spinelli. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I'm going to make a couple findings that the proposed rezone meets the policy direction as provided by the Anchorage 2020 Hillside District Plan, Potter Valley Land Use Analysis, and the draft 2040 Land Use Plan. I'm kind of reading off the summary on page 18. I purposely don't want to include that there is an overall shortage of large lot residentially zoned land, because we found in another case that there wasn't, and that the 2012 residential market study showed that there wasn't. There was a surplus of land in that case. So also, though, that the proposed rezoning is compatible with surrounding land uses. It's supported by Rabbit Creek Community Council, and it meets the rezoning criteria contained in 2103-160E.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Anyone else wish to speak to the main motion? Mr. Spinelli.
I will also support the motion. I believe that the R6 zoning can be developed appropriately in the area, and I believe that there is a market for this type of housing if done properly and affordably.
Thank you, Mr. Spinelli. Anyone else? Okay, please vote. This rezoning passes. I would ask the commission to, I think, so you showed your, if you were an abstention, Brian, I misunderstood. I thought when you had your disclosure early on that it had to do with the first information item.
Actually, it was. So I'm kind of embarrassed that, so I was not aware of this case at all. But when I go through the packet, actually, I thought I did my due diligence studying the packet, but near the back, there's some figures that show CW Engineering, my company, did do, it must have been the survey that has worked with Kilson Associates on this. But I was not aware of it personally, but my company did work on it.
Okay.
So I didn't realize it until through the proceedings. And like I say, I don't really have any preconceived notions because I didn't even know we're doing anything with it. So that's why I tried to abstain on that vote.
Yeah. What's that? Well, right. So how is his vote reflected? So we appreciate the disclosure. I think normally with a disclosure you would not have actually sat through it, right? Or we would have actually we would have weighed in on whether you ought to abstain or not. I think in this case we're sort of beyond that point, but I think we're going to ask that you show your vote as an abstention, meaning that the case passes 6-0, and in the future, just I think you said it in an email, but I didn't remember when you opened up here this evening. So I think if you saw it as you were sitting here, interrupt me, just say, hey, I noticed that we were involved, we'll take a pause, we'll weigh in on it, and then if we find that there's an issue, we'll be excused.
I do think that Mr. Looney should have to sit out at least one. We've made, I think, other folks sit out. So you need to be in timeout.
Isn't there a room back there with a bunch of sandwiches and like video games?
That's right.
That we can play?
It's a
You gotta sit
lovely
out there and
place,
listen in a
yes.
comfortable
It's a
seat.
very lovely place. Okay, there is a case, 2017-95. Could I have a motion to postpone that case to 11/6? Thank you, Mr. Strike. Seconded by Mr. Walker. Any objection? That case is postponed to November the 6th. Can I get there is the CIB packet that I asked that you bring with you for next week's meeting, yes, Lori? It's next week, and then you might as well bring your R3A packet as well. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Do we have an agenda? Yeah, what cases do we have on? I haven't seen one, Daniel. I didn't see one emailed out. Did anyone else? So I know there's an R3A and there's the CIB. I don't know if there's anything else. Yeah, I didn't see one either. Yep. This meeting is adjourned.